Equity awards are a great way to compensate employees when your stock price is on the rise. But when your stock price is in a slump, not so much. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to throw a life raft to your underwater equity awards. First, let's talk about why underwater equity awards are a problem. When equity awards are worth less than employees expect, they're not doing anything to retain employees, and they're not doing anything to motivate them employees. In order to get the return on investment that you want from your equity program, it is critical that employees value their equity awards. But when those awards end up being worth less than expected, the value employees assign to the awards tanks right along with your stock price. In a worst case scenario, employees can really feel cheated, and that can impact how they value the entire program, including awards they have that are still in the money and the future awards that you grant to them. And you might think of this as mainly just a problem that applies to stock options. When the value of our stock is worth less than the option exercise price, the options aren't worth anything. But it also can apply to full value awards like restricted stock units. For example, if you promise an employee an RSU worth $50,000 and then a year after grant, that RSU is worth only $20,000, that employee is probably pretty disappointed with how things worked out. But you know what's never underwater? That's right, your employee stock purchase plan. Because of how the price in an ESPP is typically calculated, most ESPPs are never underwater. So when your stock is in a slump, that might be a good time to focus on your ESPP and to focus a little less on your other equity programs. All right, before we get to the actions you can take to rescue your equity awards, I want to just put the brakes on. There is a real risk to taking these actions too soon. One risk is that your stock price might actually recover fairly quickly. And in that scenario, all that effort, all that cost wasn't necessary. And it can look to your shareholders like manipulation, like you took advantage of a momentary dip in your stock price to grant everyone some nice new equity awards. Shareholders that feel that way might take out their frustration on your say on pay vote. There's also the opposite risk, that your stock price will just continue to slump. And a few months later, you're back in the same sinking boat that you're in right now. All that effort, all that cost, all for naught. There are really two main actions that you can take to restore value to your equity program when your awards are underwater. The first action is to just leave those underwater equity awards alone and grant additional awards to employees. Your stock price is down, so it's actually probably a great time to grant equity to employees. This is an approach that works for both stock options and full value awards. And it's a pretty straightforward approach. You generally don't need shareholder approval to grant new equity awards. The accounting is as straightforward as it can possibly get for equity awards. And you don't need the employee's permission to grant them a new equity award. Sure, you're going to want them to sign their grant agreement, but you don't need their permission in advance. The trade-off here is cost. If you grant new equity awards, that is absolutely going to increase your plan dilution, and it's going to use more shares. That means that even though you don't need approval to issue the grants, you might end up having to go back to your shareholders and ask for a new allocation of shares to the plan sooner than you were expecting. All these new equity awards are for sure going to increase the cost of the plan, and if the stock price does recover, there's a real risk that you'll end up overcompensating your employees. Instead of granting new equity awards, another approach is to stick with the awards you have, but modify them. So if you have a bunch of underwater options, modify them to make them not underwater anymore, lower the exercise price. Or change them out, change them to RSUs, lower that exercise price to zero. You can't get any more in the money than that. This is an approach that really only works for stock options. Like I said, for your RSUs, they have a price of zero. They can't get any more in the money than they already are. But it can be a really viable approach for stock options. This approach is typically going to be a lot less dilutive and use a lot less shares than granting new equity awards. And the program can be designed in a way that minimizes or almost eliminates any cost to the company. And typically, you will ask employees to make a trade-off in order to receive the modification to their equity award. Usually, they have to give up some of the shares in their award, and they have to accept delayed or extended vesting. And those trade-offs help minimize the risk that you'll end up overcompensating employees. But that reduced cost comes with a lot of complexity. If you are a publicly held company, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to need shareholder approval for the award modifications. And the accounting treatment of modifying equity awards is crazy complicated. And in most cases, you will need employee consent in order to modify their equity awards. In fact, there's a pretty good chance that the SEC is going to view the offer to modify their equity awards as a tender offer, and then you will need to make public filings describing the offer. So those are really the two main ways that you can restore value to your equity program. I am sure that you have a bunch of questions. And guess what? The NASPP has answers. We will post some links to resources in the show notes for the video. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you'll be notified when we post new videos. And heck, even if you didn't enjoy it, subscribe anyway. Maybe you'll like the next one. Thanks for watching.